Good evening, everyone. How we doing? How we doing? I am just getting fired up here, and we will get going. Try and get some audio up a little bit higher on the voice. All right. Welcome, welcome, welcome. See if my commands are working. They're not. That's fun. Whiskey and Wow. Thanks for coming in, sir. We are getting fired up tonight on this lovely Wednesday. So we're getting close. Hey, Bob. Good to see ya. Sister's in the chat, so that's always fun. We are talking about oak in wine tonight, and we're going to go over a wee bit of material on why and where and how and all the fun stuff when it comes to seeing oak influence in wines. And this is not, well, I wouldn't say not, but it could be a Battlefield 2042 channel. I mean, they have to launch the game to play and stream it. So once they do that, when's the current date that they're going to be releasing that? Now that it got pushed a little bit. Battlefield 2042, Google search, November 19th. So we got a hot minute there. Allegedly. Alleged October beta, yeah. I mean, I definitely want to play it. I definitely want to play it for sure. But um, already got Vanguard, Call of Duty Vanguard, and that's gonna launch here in a couple of weeks. So definitely play that. I'll probably have to pre-order this and have to play it because it'll probably be pretty good. And you know, I'm always down for some fun games. But yeah. So now, what's everyone drinking tonight? I am drinking a oaked Chardonnay. Figured haven't had a Chardonnay in God knows how long, and kind of sounded nice, especially with a cauliflower black bean tacos I had, and it's a very, very robust amount of oak in this one. So no, rare breed rye wild turkey that has some oak in it, I presume. So we're off to a good start. We're off to a good start there. Trying to see if these, don't know why, none of my commands work. All right. Well, so let's get started. We're gonna get started on really why we're 115 proof and it's interesting. Is it well integrated with that 115 proof in the oak? I hope. I'll probably tangent into a little bit of whiskey because there's so many synergies between oak and wine and whiskey, and um, why it's great for aging that. So first off, why? Why was oh, this chair's going way back far. Why oak? And um, really, it comes down to um, availability of storing liquid in a vessel that'll hold uh, that liquid. So white oak from different parts of the world, mostly Europe, where it grows, and North America. Um, those different species of white oak actually have such a density to their internal structures that they can hold liquid really, really well. Um, and when paired with some sort of seasoning and toasting, which we'll get into the production aspect, allows for added flavor to a product, um, and can last a really long time. So a barrel of wine, if well built and well maintained, can really last maybe 100 years plus. Um, through basically keeping it full, keeping it maintained, um, can hold that liquid for an extreme amount of time, which is very useful when you're talking about wine and spirits being made prior to modern, you know, glass production or plastic production, for lack of a better um, secondary option there. And so it's great for transporting all around the world in large containers. You can build these oak vessels and be able to move them and crane them onto ships and take them all over the world, or roll them around, as it's fairly easy to roll even a full barrel. And so that kind of leads me into really what is inside of that white oak, um, whether it's coming from Europe or France, Europe or the Americas, and really it's um, a complex structure of the lignins and cellulose and hemicelluloses that create a structure that is tight, and there's variances there in terms of how well that tree matured over its growth cycles over many, many decades to grow into a full-grown tree. And interestingly enough, actually seeing an oak tree being cut down basically at the base and looking and measuring up that tree, only about um, there's only enough wood in an entire tree to produce about a barrel and a half, 2 barrels, depending on its width and diameter and age, um, of good solid barrel wood. The rest of the tree up from that point is going to be selected for using and producing nowadays using adjunct wood that you can dose into wine, and we'll get to that and why we do that. And then the top of the tree is going to be used for lumber. It's going to be used for creating, items to create furniture and pallets and stuff like that these days. So really, that heart of the tree is going to be your stave wood that's going to produce a barrel. So each tree is essentially a barrel, maybe two. Um, and so there's a lot of energy and resources that go into growing that tree, cutting that tree down, milling those that wood, and then from there you're going to go into um, uh, some different aspects of items that have been developed over time. And one is the seasoning of that wood, and that is basically just a process of allowing that wood to sit out in the elements, growing mold and bacteria on there to um, break down some of the harsher structures and tighten that wood, reduce the interior moisture of that wood in a slow, adequate way, to provide even tighter um, uh, internal structures of that wood, which help slower the extraction of all the components inside that wood that's going to impart flavor and aromatics to a wine or a spirit down the way. Um, and from a contextual point, Live Laugh Lloyd always coming up with random questions on which things would win in a fight or which one's better. French toast wins over pancakes, but waffles beat those two every single time because waffles have little pockets to hold things. Pancakes just sloughs right off. No bueno. And then French toast is just like cinnamon bread. So while good, not as good as a waffle. Um, how many different breeds of oak are there? There are I believe there are four. There are, yes, we do use um, for winemaking and aging, but in terms of wood used, white oak used for wine and or spirits, there's basically four species of white oak. Um, the American cousin, which is, I believe, Quercus alba, and then Quercus petrea, I forget the enunciation on the European side, but there are all my pages over here, and there's just 1,000 little things there. Yeah, so um, yes, American oak is Quercus alba, and then European oak is Quercus rhubarb, and then Quercus petrea is another European subspecies, but very similar in terms of its structure and similarities between French oak and the forces within France, or what is nowadays France, and the rest of Europe, all the way up into Slovakia, Slovenia, Czech Republic, uh, Russian, uh, all those areas in northeastern Europe. And the main differences between your American oak and your European oak is the density at which and the speed at which those trees grow. American oak does grow faster than um, than the European oak, and that's really just from a richer climate, better seasonal changes between rain. Jeez, quiet over here. Between rain and heat and humidity, so you have a little bit faster growing, and um, that grain inside, as those growth rings are happening every single year, that density becomes wider and wider, being coarser and coarser. Um, and traditionally, that's the way it was looked at, is um, American oak having more on the whole coarser grain, and French oak and European oak having tighter and finer grain, which leads to generically faster extraction, and faster extraction on the American oak and slower extraction on the French oak. Nowadays, with the practices that they are, American oak can be grown and selected to have a wide range of um, tighter and tighter grain build, very similar to French oak. While the species differences remain the same, you can get fairly close to the level of quality you can get from really fine to super fine grain American oak that's well seasoned. I believe it's actually rhubarb. Um, I love American oak myself. I think it's a little more versatile for the overall wine production. But French oak is and has always been a little bit more sought after. But I'm gonna go with America. America. Hell yeah. Wow. USA. USA. Yeah, and so the American oak has always been produced for spirits production. And then, as I mentioned a second ago, the seasoning aspect has changed. While seasoning for a whiskey barrel is very short, and it's actually going to be dried very quickly, so it then can um, fired um, and charred for that spirit barrel production. So it's a faster turnaround there. Trees grow faster, they season it faster, they char it faster, and it's ready to go for spirit productions. But these days, American oak producers are really honing um, the management of forests and the selection of the trees to denote that quality difference for high end or higher end wine production. It's very different from 30, 40 years ago. Um, so that's kind of one thing, is the lines between the two are getting closer. And then there's even different aspects of French oak. There's a wider breadth of um, French oak that is a little more economical, and then there's the other end where it's very, very expensive. Barrels from high-end areas from different producers can be thousands of dollars a piece, versus American oak barrels can be anywhere from 400 to 600, maybe even 800 on the high end. And some of those costs do come from freight and logistics of getting it across the ocean, and the costs associated with that. So those are kind of the two baselines of where we're starting from on the oak, and we're just talking about barrels at this point, and those two different aspects play a big consideration to how you're going to use that to age a wine. And why do we age a wine in a barrel? As we said, it holds liquid very well, but it has a lot of great attributes when it comes to adding flavor and aromatics to it. And a lot of that is coming from the toasting process of a barrel. And that barrel is going to be toasted using various methods. Usually it's just burning a small kiln inside of a built barrel that's fresh wood put together and held together with pressure by the hoops. So in the production of a barrel, the iconic look of a barrel, that it's basically straight staves that are heated using like just a warm enough fire to get that wood a little malleable, and then using pressure of steel ringed hoops to build that, and then fix them down. And then as that wood becomes a little pliable, they're able to shape that to be narrow on the inside, have a bulge in the belly, and come back. And that's really to hold the ends of the barrel, the heads, in place, so you can kind of clamp them down on themselves to hold the overall liquid. I doubt you can build a true cylinder or a square barrel. There's other ways to build upright barrels or casks that are large, that can hold thousands of gallons. Um, and those traditionally were originally made of redwood, which is another hardwood that can hold liquid really well. There's some different aspects of using redwood that imparts a lot of different flavor than a white oak that we use today. But some of the flavor attributes you're going to get from a toasted wood barrel is going to be aromatics of vanilla from the vanillin compound. There's going to be spicy clovey attributes coming from some, I'm going to go over some chemical names, but eugenol and isoeugenol. And then the caramelly, sweet, sugary notes are going to be coming from another chemical called furfural and another substrate called 5-methyl furfural. And then the kind of smoky, charry aspects are coming from a guaiacol molecule or guaiacol component. And then there's another sub thing there called 4-methyl guaiacol. Um, and all these different things work in a matrices that help add different attributes to the wine. And generally, you're going to see larger amounts of vanillin, furfural, in the analytical side of what's going to impart in the wine. And really, from looking at where the toasting is happening against that wood, the first thing that's happening is the furfural is going to be on the leading edge. That caramelly toastiness is going to be on that leading edge, and then just past that, you're going to be in kind of that vanilla range. And then some of those other attributes are going to be kind of behind that. And then inside of that is going to be more of the wood tannins are going to add some more structure to the wine, more non-flavor and aromatic attributes, but more structural tasting pieces to it. And your level of toasting affects those different compounds in in the overall build of the barrel in terms of what you want to look for. So um, generically, there's been kind of three different toast levels. There's kind of a light or blonde toast, and there's a medium toast and a heavy toast, very similar to like roasting coffee. With some of the blonde toasts, you're going to get some more of the light toasty attributes, coconutty attributes, and then the heavier toast, you're getting more of that spicy, caramelly, dark chocolate, smoky attributes. And then with newer technology, we're able to dial in the time temperature relationship of that toasting regime on an oak stave for either barrel production or adjunct production. We'll get into the adjuncts momentarily, but the um, use of research and high-end analytical um, testing methodologies, they're able to experiment and figure out if I toast a barrel at this temperature for a long time, I'm going to get these flavors in this composition. But if I toast it at a higher temperature for a shorter period, I get these different attributes. And then if I have a low temperature for a long time and then spike the temperature for a short amount of time, I get all these different amounts of those different vanillins and eugenol, furfural, glycol components in relative ratios and can lead to um, variances of how you smell and taste the wine, what's going to impart in that wine over the amount of time you're going to age it. So giving you more and more options on what you taste and impart on the wine, allowing winemakers and people to have um, some different elements they can provide to a wine. If it's a lighter wine or a heavier wine, if it's a white wine, or if it's a really dark structured wine. So those flavor components, and then the secondary attribute um, of using an oak barrel is the slow egress of oxygen from that wood into the wine to allow aging process to happen. The breathing of the barrel um, permeating oxygen slowly through that wood and into the wine, allowing the tannin structures of the wine and the wood and the aromatics to concentrate to polymerize or build bigger structures of molecules um, is a secondary effect of that. And then time is a third effect where it's going to increase in the oak aromatics and the flavor attributes as well as the the amount of oxygen egressed in there. And there's perfect timings to all that, very dependent on your winemaking style, the structure of that wine to start with, and how that's going to play into the end all appearance and perception of that wine and longevity of that wine. So a lot of decisions have to go in there. Is wine seeing anything like whiskey where sort of gimmicky aging techniques create demand? There has definitely been a lot of um, I wouldn't call it gimmicky. I feel like it's a lot of experimentation, figuring out how spirit producers have been using wine barrels or sherry barrels or port barrels to finish a spirit on. Um, Spirit producers use different amounts of um, toasting or charring, really, for a spirit barrel um, to add a different amount of complex to the overall build of an entire blend. And you can use different levels of toasting or charring in a wine or a spirit um, to kind of hotspot all the different attributes you can get from those different toasting and charring methods or time and temperature relationships and create an overall blend that's interesting. Um, Nowadays, wine is seeing a lot of toast profiles that come out that are going to give you a very specific element or attribute. There are toast profiles that they call creme brulee that can add this creamy, um, charry, um, sugary taste and aromatic to it. There's ones called like medium rare steak that can add savory, a little charry attribute, a little meatiness, a little spiciness to the wine. Um, there are ones that are perfect that can add like a mocha coffee attribute to the wine. There are toast profiles that um, can add like again, that sweetness, that vanilla, um, I'm trying to think of the exact term that some of these cooperages use to call that. What the heck do they call it? They'll call it sweet oak or sugar cane or something, goofy like that. Gimmicky in name, but can add and relatively very, very accurate sometimes. Maybe sometimes leading the witness a little bit on what it's providing, but it's just either extreme levels of these different components, the vanillins, the furfurols, um, uh, the lactone attributes. That's kind of the coconutty perception, the smokiness, and if you find the right combinations of those different things, you have kind of a unique prescription blend that you can provide to that wine. And some of them are really spot on. Some are a little, again, gimmicky. But then that leads into the gimmicky aspect of the reverse of the spirit guys using wine barrels, but wine producers using charred spirit barrels after they've been used for spirit production. They'll then take that dumped spirit barrel and put wine into it, adding a spirity element to that wine, that charred barrel, for a relatively short period of time. That can add a lot of very high tone spirit attributes, more vanilla attributes, smokiness to the wine, uh, which can be very, very fun. But it is a charred barrel that has seen spirit, so you're getting a little bit of interaction between the two, especially as it probably has very small amounts of actual spirit left in that barrel um, that can interact and add elements of that spirit into that wine, which is not technically legal, but what's in the pores of that wood is not really traceable in terms of a compositional aspect of what you're producing. So a little bit of a loophole, um, but also very fun to experiment with and try with. You know, all these different toast profiles and stuff are really done on non-barrel wood, and they're used in uh, pieces of wood very similar to the barrel of wood, but from that little higher section, as we mentioned earlier, of that tree. They're then chopped into smaller bits. So you have a barrel that is essentially about 22 and a half, um, 22 and a half square foot of interior surface that is in contact with the wine. You're able to get very, very small, minute sections of a piece of wood that are yay big to yay big to yay big to little grains of wood that can be used throughout the winemaking process. So um, those adjuncts are very versatile and much more cost effective than a barrel can be, and don't require the amount of time to extract the same flavor attributes, maybe not the same quality that you see from long-term aging a barrel, but you can get damn close um, using wood chips and larger segments, cubes, blocks, whatever they want to call them, into actual pieces or planks of wood that are roughly about 3 feet long and about a quarter-inch thick, and they can be installed inside a stainless steel tank and be toasted in such a way they can add these different attributes, whether it's tons of vanilla or tons of spice or tons of mocha or a lot of like raw toastiness or just a generic round profile of wood that can mimic the barrel at a much more effective cost, which can lead to um, great wine at a cheaper price, which I think is the big difference in wine production over the last 20, 30 years, um, maybe even 30, 40. And nowadays there's even more options. There's even more accessibility to even higher quality of that adjunct wood, these smaller formats of non-barrel wood that are barrel quality in terms of the sourcing of where that wood is coming from. And it allows the winemaker to have all these different plays on the cost effectiveness, the taste quality, and you can really dial in exact amounts of attributes of these wood characteristics that you're looking for. So the Chardonnay I'm drinking tonight is actually a Chardonnay that's fermented in barrel. It is this is actually a Russian River. I think it's Russian River. I think it's Sonoma. Um, Sonoma Chardonnay. Um, it's 2019, so it's seen a little bit of age. Um, but it's fermented in basically all French oak. So it's from a cooler climate Chardonnay region that they allow to get really ripe, but it still has a lot of acidity, some great minerality. But the amount of time it's spent fermenting on oak and aging on oak, going through malolactic and aging time, mixing with that leaves, it's super creamy. It still has a lot of great tropical aromatics from the fruit, but there's kind of melony, um, lean attributes as well to the wine, which is fantastic. Um, and because they're using French oak, they're able to slowly integrate that um, flavor of wood in combination with a really great amount of fruit and acid that's going to be in this wine. That is in this wine, I should say. Um, if you used an American oak, you'd get a lot more of the upfront toastiness or coconutty and vanilla attributes to the wine that um, modern day Chardonnay drinkers really love. If they like an oak Chardonnay, they want a lot of Chardonnay. They want a lot of creaminess, a lot of sweetness, a lot of toastiness in conjunction with the ripe tropical Chardonnay characteristics. Um, Sauvignon Blanc is another white variety that sees oak in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes, a lot of times, it's not really new oak. It's older oak that's going to impart very little flavor, but can add some nice body and structure to that. A Sauvignon Blanc, especially if it's a riper style Sauvignon Blanc. And in the United States, they coined it actually Fumé Blanc. Um, and there's some producers that do some really nice, oaked or lightly oaked Sauvignon Blanc that has seen some time in contact with the lees in that barrel, adding to the adding to the elements of a crisp Sauvignon Blanc, not being so linear, but adding a little bit of weight and body. They're very fun. If you see one, you see Fumé Blanc, you're like, what the heck is that? Just know that it is Sauvignon Blanc, um, but it does have some interesting attributes. So, um, again, we talked about these adjuncts and what they can provide and how they can provide it. Um, um, One of their attribute or one other area of oak aging is going to come from other woods, and there's been some use of other woods like acacia wood um, and cherry wood that have been seen in some interesting winemakers want to look at different wood varieties to add some different characteristics, and some of these have um, very similar um, attributes to white oak, but they lack the different internal structures that make up that wood. So they can maybe add, maybe they can add some vanilla attributes, but they don't have the compositional structure inside to add toastiness or spice because of what's going to be toasted in there. They don't have that same baseline composition of that wood to provide that. Um, yeah. Uh, Still trying to figure out the name of that. I think there's one that's called like Sugar and Spice. It's a very fun toast profile from one specific Cooper that creates it. That it is very like spicy, cinnamon, kind of holiday pumpkin spice, but also has some sweet caramelized sugar attributes to it. Um, so there's um, tons of research on how to get these flavors out, and tons of different methodologies to toast that barrel. Um, Traditionally, it's always been done by a literal fire and a guy watching it and knowing how long it's been on there and how hot that fire is inside that barrel. Um, Nowadays, with different methodologies, there's convection toasting where they're using a literal oven at a prescribed temperature for an amount of time to mimic a wood fire. There's infrared toasting where they're using infrared elements to irradiate heat into that wood. And some of these have very different attributes to them, while convection toasting is much like just an oven that's going to heat up the entirety of that wood. Infrared's going to really just hit that top layer of the wood, and they have different elements and attributes that um, add to the wine in different ways depending on the amount of time you're aging it. So it gives you more options as a winemaker, which is really fun to use, but it also at this point is complicated in terms of who's doing what, what's good, what do I need it for, how's it going to affect a blend if I use 100% this versus that. You can get two wines that um, can taste fairly similar in terms of the fruit profile and the structure, but the aromatics can be changed from that oak profile. So it can allow you to pivot the perception of that wine in a way that your consumers may like, you may like. You may use a multitude of these different methodologies. Um, and that kind of leads me into like how long do you age wines? So aging wine in an oak barrel, it's a very slow process, but allows you to really dial in the exact amount of aging to allow that wine to structure up properly, add all those different flavor attributes, get the wine kind of ready to be bottled at a certain point, to which would add ageability of the wine, but also adds cost. And now with adjuncts, you're going to be looking at a shorter time to age that wine on to achieve similar levels. And there's different, you can add these adjuncts throughout the process, which is also very interesting. So um, personally, um, I like to use wood throughout the entire life of the wine if it's not going to go to a barrel, because there's effects to the color stability, the tannin stability of wines if you're using oak at the right stages, especially for wines that don't have that ageability. You're able to uplift and increase the overall quality using oak at different times. So using oak, a fine oak, to ferment on the skins and seeds as you're extracting color and tannin from the sweet grape juice. Um, and then you can add more oak in the malolactic fermentation stage to add more oak attributes. But again, stabilizing more color, stabilizing being taking those color molecules and binding them in a way that they're locked in place is how we view it and how it's chemically what's happening. And then sometimes even a tertiary amount of oak you're using to finish aging on to achieve like the exact amount of oak element and attributes you want to taste in the wine. And all those things can build on themselves and get to where you want, in a relatively short period, to where that wine, versus waiting 18 months or 2 years to get to that point in a barrel, you can do that, depending on how much you're adding into there, because you can add a lot more oak chips and staves into the same volume of wine versus a barrel, which has a finite amount of space, versus adding an oak into, sorry, that was like very jumpy. You can add a bunch of oak into a tank and essentially get, a 100 or 200 or 300 or even 1,000% new barrel amounts in a relatively short period of time that that give you the uh, great amount of oak characteristic very, very shortly. You have to pay attention to these things as a winemaker, and that's kind of half the fun of it. You can get a very robust oak profile from a aromatic aromatic standpoint in a couple of weeks. You can use extreme amounts of oak for. I mean, I've personally used basically like 10x barrel equivalent and aged a wine on that for 14 days. And you got this huge amount of oak profile initially. You're extracting out a ton of oak very, very quickly. And then you take that wine off that oak, and then that wine will slowly kind of pivot down and um, plateau at a really nice point. And then there's different ways to think about this. I can go very like low and slow barbecue technique where I want a low amount of oak in that adjunct form for 6 months, or I can do it in 2 weeks. They have different results, but you can kind of get to the same point if you're diligent and paying attention enough. So it gives you those options of really hot spotting a specific oak aromatic or structure aromatic you're looking for in a relatively short period of time. And again, these adjuncts are vastly cheaper than a barrel um, versus the alternatives, these adjunct items. I mean, uh, the surface area equivalent of a new barrel equivalent is like 1/16th the cost of a barrel, so it's highly advantageous depending on the price point of the wine and what you're looking at doing in terms of the aging profile. Um, and so it really comes down to what's the purpose of this wine, what you're going to be selling for, and what impacts you want to have on it. And those are the decisions that go into that wine. And that's what makes winemaking so much fun for me is I get to play with all the different ends of these spectrums throughout the process, see what works, see what doesn't, pivot and modify on a year-to-year basis. And then every year, the producers of these oak products come out with better research, new products, new things to try, new ways to think about the applications. And some of the newest applications, these are actually extracted liquids, which they're soaking those wood adjuncts in a water solution or a alcohol solution, extracting all the fun aromatic contributes into a liquid that then I can just volumetrically add into the tank and get enhanced amounts of vanilla or spiciness or toastiness to the wine and or even structure, um, tannin, all these different things, and I can do it in a second. And that is some very fun uh, new ways of how we're approaching oak aging. Is I can be adding oak at the crusher, oak during the aging, a final touch of um, wood prior to bottling, and then I can even use a dose of a liquid oak right before bottling to uplift some of these different attributes, uplift fruit, uplift the oak profile, and get to a point to where it's uh, this unique profile that tastes very similar to the highest end um, aged wines. And um, you know, blind tasting, some people could tell a difference, some people can't. Um, and there's definitely a lot more people using some of these adjuncts than you'd realize, even on the high end market, where they're looking at um, getting to their end goal a little bit quicker, adding elements they can't get from a barrel into that end wine. And the world is our oyster when it comes to some of the tools they have and the things they're producing to allow these additions of oak products into wine at all the different stages. So um, think about that next time you're buying wine, and think about how they're getting that oak aromatic and oak flavor in that wine, because it could be one method, could be multiple these methods I've just highlighted. Um, and then, it could be the traditional, just make the wine, make the best one you can, put into a nice barrel, allow it to age and taste, see that progression over time, make a call, okay, this wine's right where I want it to be. We're gonna consolidate all this wine in barrels into a tank. We're gonna get ready to bottle, put it in a bottle, and wine's good to go. To each their own on all these fronts. Um, Again, tons of research coming out on all these different attributes. Um, and it's only going to make wine quality better and better as we do it. So that's my spiel for the night. So I'm going to get a refill, and we're going to play some games and see who is a playing.